It is early 2018. The tranquil village of Schneitach is in a state of excitement. Elfriede and Peter P, a married couple, are missing. The 65-year-old woman and 70-year-old man have been missing since December 13th, 2017. Their son Ingo and his wife Stephanie appealed to their fellow citizens in a television interview.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear relatives, dear family members, I hope that one of you can provide any information about my parents. We miss them terribly. The greatest joy we could have would be for them to simply come back home so that we at least know what has happened to them.
The interview is recorded at the family home in Schneitach. The camera crew present has no idea how close they are to the missing persons at that moment. The bodies of Elfriede and Peter are only a few meters away. The house on Hedersdorfer Strasse in the small town of Schneitach looks idyllic. Its owners, 65-year-old Elfriede and 70-year-old Peter, place great importance on tidiness. The property is well maintained, the windows are always freshly cleaned, and there are hardly any weeds to be seen. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, Elfriede goes outside to sweep the sidewalk in front of the house. At 3:30 p.m., the family gathers for coffee and cake. The elderly couple lives in the house with their adult son, Ingo. When he was born, Elfriede was already 40 and Peter was 45. The couple had tried unsuccessfully for a long time to have a child. When their wish finally came true, they were overjoyed. The boy grew up in a very sheltered environment. As a child, Ingo played the keyboard and took lessons. Elfriede and Peter attend all of their son's performances and support him as best they can. In his youth, Ingo suffers greatly from being overweight. Ingo doesn't have an easy time of it in other ways either. He looks up to his parents, especially his father Peter, with whom he often dresses alike even as a teenager. His parents always drive him to school. Elfriede and Peter also show up at his secondary school during breaks to bring him a second breakfast. When Ingo is at the playground, one of his parents is always nearby. This causes other children to tease him. He doesn't have many friends. As a teenager, he is teased as a mama's boy or fat Ingo. Nevertheless, Ingo masters his school career and then goes on to vocational training. He seems to enjoy his parents' quiet life, which may seem restrictive to some outsiders. He is a meticulous, rational person. Ingo keeps numerous lists to organize his life, even for mundane things like which New Year's Eve fireworks are best. Like his parents, he seems to want to have his adult life firmly under control. After completing his apprenticeship, Ingo moves to Nuremberg and into his own apartment. However, he does not live there for long. Shortly afterwards, he returns to his hometown of Schneitach and moves back in with Elfriede and Peter. He has his own apartment in the attic of his parents' house, which he has renovated. He even took out a loan to be able to design the floor according to his wishes. He moves in there with his then partner Franziska. The two live with Elfriede and Peter for about 6 months. Then Ingo breaks up with Franziska. Now 26, he's a computer scientist and is studying part-time. He is ambitious and wants to work his way up to a management position. Getting married soon also seems to be a major goal. Shortly after breaking up with Franziska, he meets a new woman through a dating app. Her name is Stephanie. She's 3 years younger than him and a trained nanny. The two meet in December 2016, about a year before Elfriede and Peter disappear. They quickly become a couple. Stephanie soon proposes to Ingo. Both want children and plan to start a family. However, there is repeated tension between Elfriede, Peter, and Ingo's fiancée, Stephanie. Among other things, Elfriede thinks she is too messy. The 23-year-old Stephanie does not seem to get along particularly well with her in-laws in other respects either. Elfriede and Peter are also not enthusiastic about the plans to have children. They are skeptical because Ingo and Stephanie have not been together for very long. Not least because of this, there is also tension between Ingo and Stephanie. He wants her to move to Schneitach with him. However, Stephanie has no desire to do so. For her, moving into her parents-in-law's house is out of the question. But that changes at the end of December 2017, when Elfriede and Peter disappear. Ingo files a missing persons report for his parents on December 28, 2017. Just one day later, Ingo and Stephanie get married. She moves in with him in Elfriede and Peter's house. The couple gets a puppy. Ingo had wanted a dog since he was a child, but his parents wouldn't let him have one. He pays for the husky puppy in cash. Ingo tells the neighbors that Elfriede and Peter are visiting relatives over the holidays. The newlyweds celebrate New Year's Eve together and don't start searching for Elfriede and Peter until the new year. Behind closed doors, it seems that there is once again a crisis brewing. On New Year's Eve 2017, Stephanie signs up for an online dating site. In the new year, she Googles how to get a divorce. However, Ingo and Stephanie don't let on that anything is wrong. The two make statements to the police and give numerous interviews. Ingo tells the police that Elfriede and Peter went on vacation on December 13, 2017. On that day, the two packed their suitcases. They wanted to visit someone. Peter and Elfriede took quite a lot of cash and luggage with them. It was as if they were going on a long trip, but he didn't know where they were going. He told the neighbors that Elfriede and Peter were in Kassel, about a 4-hour drive away. Ingo cannot say how the two left, whether by train, taxi, or on foot. But something is not right here. The police are, of course, also asking around among their extended circle of acquaintances. The neighbors say that the couple has never been away from home over Christmas before. Elfriede's dentist says that his patient had an urgent appointment on December 21st. However, she did not show up, even though she had insisted on having the treatment done before Christmas. Peter also fails to show up for an important appointment. He suffers from diabetes and attends a support group for people with the condition. He has never missed a meeting without giving notice. Until December 2017. The motorhome that Elfriede and Peter usually use for their trips is parked in front of the house. On January 1st, 2018, Ingo puts his parents' motorhome online on eBay Classifieds for sale. And that despite the fact that his parents, who own it, are still missing. When the police search the house to investigate the alleged missing persons case, they come across further inconsistencies. It smells of fresh paint, as if it has just been renovated. However, it doesn't appear to have been done with much care. The amateurish renovation work doesn't match the otherwise meticulously maintained property. Meanwhile, Ingo and Stephanie are also asking for donations, both via a Facebook page and through interviews. After interviewing Ingo and Stephanie, the journalist immediately has a strange feeling. It is so strong that he even reports it to the police. At this point, the officers are already investigating Elfriede and Peter's son and his wife. Stephanie and Ingo's cell phones are tapped. Their internet search histories are also checked. In order not to alarm the couple, the police officially treat Elfriede and Peter's case as a missing persons case, but the experienced investigators are aware that they are probably dealing with something completely different. They do not believe that Elfriede and Peter P are still alive. They believe it is not a missing persons case, but a murder case. A murder case that took place within the closest family circle. The amateurish renovations, the strange statement that the couple was on vacation, and the seemingly unconcerned behavior of Ingo and Stephanie have long since made the two more than suspicious. The police are just waiting for the right moment to strike, and that moment is January 22nd, 2018. On January 22, 2018, the police lure the two suspects to a highway entrance under false pretenses. There, Stephanie and Ingo are arrested. Ingo initially refuses to make any statement. His wife Stephanie claims she had nothing to do with the disappearance of her parents-in-law. She claims that her husband Ingo murdered the elderly couple on his own. She claims that she was not even in the house at the time of the double murder. She says she was in her hometown, about 35 kilometers away. She says she was watching television there and then went to bed. On the morning of December 14th, she called Ingo and asked him to pick her up if his parents agreed. Ingo then said, "They agreed to it because they're no longer around." She said she had been abused in the period after Ingo's murders. She claimed that it was only under threat that she helped him cover up the double murder the day after it happened. He locked her up and physically assaulted her, causing her to suffer a concussion. On another occasion, he put paint thinner in her coffee in an attempt to poison her. However, a forensic examination found no traces of violence or attempted poisoning. On December 14th, the day after the crime, Stephanie and Ingo discussed a possible sentence. This is evidenced by WhatsApp messages between the two. They even sent each other screenshots of legal texts. Ingo and Stephanie also researched similar cases and how the perpetrators in those cases were caught in order to avoid making their own mistakes. However, despite Ingo's IT skills, they did not cover their digital tracks carefully enough. The police managed to recover numerous screenshots and chat histories, some of which had been deleted. Even after the crime, Ingo wrote another one of his lists. But instead of his favorite fireworks, the items on the list he writes after murdering his parents are: remove wallpaper, fill and paint walls, varnish furniture. He also writes down time slots for completing the tasks and notes which of the two is to do what. An I for Ingo, an S for Stephanie. Stephanie tells the officers where her parents-in-law are. They are walled up and covered in salt in the garage of the house in Schneitach, along with parts of the supposed luggage that, according to Ingo, they had taken with them on their alleged vacation. The two bodies are also wrapped in plastic bags. The alleged murder weapon, a carpenter's hammer, is also there, wrapped in a bloody bedsheet.
The bodies were found in a garage extension. So we assume that the suspect killed the two people, his parents, and then hid them in the garage extension and took all measures to clean up the crime scene and divert suspicion away from himself by suggesting a vacation trip, possible suicide or accident.
The bodies are in a gruesome state, and not just because of the onset of decomposition. Both Elfriede and Peter appear to have been beaten to death with a hammer-like object. Elfriede suffered such severe injuries that she can only be identified through DNA matching. This fact gives only a hint of how brutal the perpetrator must have been. Her own son is said to have struck her in the face with a hammer at least 13 times. Elfriede was already lying in bed asleep, so she was hardly able to defend herself. Peter is said to have entered the bedroom shortly afterwards, whereupon Ingo also attacked him. The fight continued throughout the house before Peter succumbed to his serious injuries under the dining table. Ingo is said to have hit him at least 12 times on the head. Both Ingo and Stephanie remain in custody. Investigators have no doubt that Ingo is the murderer of his own parents. Although Stephanie cooperated after her arrest and denied any complicity, the police do not believe her. Despite the serious allegations Stephanie has made against Ingo, the two remain in contact. They are in custody in different cities. Nevertheless, they write love letters to each other and are still a couple. There seems to be a unique dynamic between the two defendants, based on a more than toxic relationship. It is only through the trial of Stephanie and Ingo, which we will focus on in the next chapter, that the extent of the disturbed relationship between the two, as well as with Elfriede and Peter, becomes clear. While Stephanie at least spoke to the police beforehand, the two defendants are now remaining silent in court. The trial is scheduled to last 21 days. More than 65 witnesses and experts are expected to testify during the proceedings. Media interest remains huge. The case has caused a stir not only in the region. Pictures of the interview with Stephanie and Ingo are all over the German press. The horror at the cold, calculating behavior of the two is enormous. When confronted with photos of the two for the first time, hardly anyone would think they were murderers. And the fact that Ingo, whose parents did everything for him and who had a sheltered childhood, became the murderer of his own parents seems inconceivable to many people. During the trial, however, witnesses and experts paint a picture that shows a completely different side of Ingo and Stephanie. Among the witnesses called is Ingo's ex-girlfriend Franziska. He lived with her for about 6 months in his parents' house in Schneitach. She can therefore tell us a lot about what it was like to live with the P family. Ingo's relationship with his father was much closer than with his mother. While he spent a lot of time with his father Peter, Elfriede was really only there to run the household. Ingo and Elfriede also had frequent heated arguments. Once, the mother even slapped her son. Franziska says that the relationship between her and Ingo was marked by conflict. Once he locked her in the bathroom, another time he slammed her head against the kitchen counter. Ingo repeatedly pushed her and pressured her to do household chores, even when she was sick in bed. Franziska says she was glad when the relationship ended. However, it was Ingo who initiated the breakup. He broke up with her because of her weight. Franziska had also met Ingo through an online dating platform. It was only over time that Ingo began to have violent outbursts, says Franziska. He also controlled her weight, forced her to weigh herself twice a day, and prescribed diet plans for her. Franziska further states that Ingo had a serious alcohol problem. He also threatened to harm her or her mother if she told anyone about his behavior. The relationship ended just a few months before Ingo and Stephanie met. Two of Stephanie's ex-partners also testify in court. One of them, a young man named Marion, described Stephanie as violent during their relationship. She repeatedly started arguments out of nowhere, threw objects at him, and scratched him. He even shows scars on his arms that he claims were caused by Stephanie. If she didn't like the food he cooked, she would carelessly throw her plate on the floor. She had a difficult relationship with her parents. A family member was also said to have been a problem in Stephanie's second relationship. Her other ex-boyfriend, Michael, says she couldn't stand his sister. Once, Stephanie wrote about her in a message. It would be better if she were dead. Stephanie and Michael had been in an on-again, off-again relationship for about 2 years, even at the time when Stephanie was actually already with Ingo. In any case, she was always chatting with other men. When Stephanie met Ingo on the dating platform, she was even pregnant by Michael. After she suffered a miscarriage, Michael broke up with her for good. When Ingo and Stephanie got together, it seemed like two explosive personalities had collided. A video that Ingo recorded of himself was shown as evidence in court. He looks tearfully into his cell phone camera and turns to Stephanie in desperation. Ingo asks her when she will finally marry him and says that he can't take it anymore. Another time, he expresses suicidal thoughts and claims to have hurt himself for Stephanie. And all of this culminates in Ingo killing his own parents. In the eyes of the court, it is clear that Stephanie and Ingo jointly decided to murder Elfriede and Peter. Their motive was that they wanted to live together undisturbed in the house in Schneitach. The chat logs clearly show that Stephanie incited Ingo to commit the murders. Although she was not present during the crime, her influence on Ingo caused him to be willing to brutally murder his own parents. Only when her parents were no longer a hindrance was Stephanie willing to marry Ingo and move in with him. The police found interesting search histories in the browser data. It is possible that Ingo and Stephanie may have already attempted to poison Elfriede and Peter in November. The couple is said to have Googled poisons that are fatal to humans. Ingo ordered at least 2 different poisonous plants. Seeds from one of these poisonous plants are found near the walled-up bodies of his parents in the garage. They may have tried to poison Elfriede's coffee and bake muffins laced with poison. In fact, Elfriede visits her family doctor on November 21st, 2017, with severe gastrointestinal symptoms. A day later, the WhatsApp conversation between Ingo and Stephanie reads as follows. "You ruin everything over and over again. You're so fake and sneaky. You're a real evil. All you need is a fool who always takes the blame for everything. You drove me to murder. I said we should break up, but you came up with the idea. I said it was going too far. That's the most brazen thing I've ever heard. Maybe I should have given you the muffin after all. I made a mistake." Ingo continues, "As long as you keep going on like this, breaking people's hopes, I can't promise you that it won't happen again on Sunday or worse. Where you half strangled me? Oh, come on, you were just playing. You like it. Are you crazy? I'm still in pain and you want me to like that? I've never hurt anyone like I hurt you and I don't want to. Why are you making me do this? I don't believe you. You have such extreme violence inside you. That can't come from overnight." The attempted poisoning can no longer be proven, so the two are acquitted of this charge. Nevertheless, the prosecutor assumes that Ingo at least wanted to poison his mother with the muffin. He wrote down the name of a plant-based poison that loses its effect when heated. So if he had used this poison to bake the muffins, his attempt could have failed and instead triggered Elfriede's symptoms. What the prosecution can prove is that Ingo and Stephanie inquired about cleaning methods after the murder. For example, how to easily remove bloodstains. The two had also discussed murder repeatedly in the past. However, Stephanie insists that she was never involved in the murder.
The client has always said that she knew nothing about the crime and that she was not involved in its preparation. She also stated that after the crime, she was more or less forced, through psychological and physical coercion, pressure, and beatings, to remain with her husband in his house in Schneitach and to live with him in a kind of cohabitation.
Stephanie decides to appeal. She does not want to accept a conviction for incitement to murder. The Federal Court of Justice upholds this decision. However, in a second trial, the verdict is confirmed. Stephanie is sentenced to life imprisonment. The court finds that she was the mastermind behind the murder. She incited Ingo to commit the crime in order to get rid of his parents. She hoped this would allow her to live a quiet life with Ingo in Schneitach. Ingo saw the murder of his parents as the only way to marry Stephanie and finally live with her. According to the regional court, without her influence, the double murder would never have happened. The convicted woman continues to deny this to this day. Ingo has also filed an appeal. However, this was rejected by the Federal Court of Justice. Stephanie and Ingo are no longer a couple. The two have filed for divorce, and it is likely that they will not spend their lives in the small house in Schneitach, but in prison, separated from each other. And that brings us to the end of today's video. The double murder in Schneitach is probably one of the most shocking cases in Germany and also one of the saddest. Feel free to write your thoughts on the case in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and/or subscribe. It really helps support the channel. And don't forget to activate the bell, because that way the video will get a lot of interaction shortly after it's uploaded, which increases the likelihood that it will be recommended to people who haven't subscribed to Insolito yet. Thanks in advance, and thanks for watching. I hope you have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you watch the video, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, bye, everyone.